Hello, my name is Jacob Christensen and I'm a developer at Sitecore. For this next part, I won't actually be doing a demo. Instead, I thought it would be nice to talk a little bit all the various items and files that goes into making a Speak component. Speak component is basically just renderings, but on top of the standard Sitecore renderings, Speak introduces some JavaScript files and possibly some CSS, and most of Speak components also need a parameters template. So let's go in and create a new component. I'll go here, component, I'll call this just sample. And it's creating the item. There we go. Well, let's go into the most important part first, which is the rendering. Now this is a standard rendering, so there is a path, but as I said, there is also a parameters template that you need to set up. Now this is important because this actually defines the properties of this particular rendering so that you could use it for data binding, and we can automate a little bit of the JavaScript and the view, the MVC view. So it's important to set up this parameters template. So let's go in and create a new template. I'll call this the sample template, like that, and we'll go back here and set it up like that. Now for the template, it's quite important that you set the base templates, and it should be, usually there are these 5 base templates to use. The first one is if you have a block control, which is just the HTML block, it fills a full line. There's a button, there is a control. The control defines an ID and if the rendering is visible or not. Input has a value and is enabled property, but for this one we just want to do the control base. So this is important. I go back to the rendering. What you usually want to do is you also want to use this parameters template as your data source template, and you usually want to dump that into the page settings. So Rocks will actually pick this up and give you the ability to create a data source automatically using these 2 data source fields, the template and the location. Next up, further down here, we have 2 new fields. One is called Placeholders, the other is Default Parameters. Placeholders, to make it really easy to build all of these layouts in Speak, we need to know which kind of placeholders each rendering exposes. And there's no way that we, from a programmatically point of view, can actually determine this. So you have to go into this field and say which placeholders does this particular rendering expose to the rest of the system. So this could be something like body and footer, header. This would tell the system that this rendering exposes 3 placeholders. Now there's a little bit of a trick in here as well, a little magic, unfortunately, because a particular rendering might be used many times on the same page. And to distinguish between these different placeholders, you can actually do like this, and it's actually, no, sorry, like this. You have to do it like that, and it's actually quite important that you do it in this way. I think it's case sensitive. For some reason, this part of it is case sensitive. What this will do is it will actually just replace this macro with the ID attribute of this rendering. So this rendering, if it was called demo, it would expose 3 placeholders. One would be demo.body, another one would be demo.footer, and the last one would be demo.header. So this is important to set up as well to make the system easy to use. The other one is the default parameters, and this tells just sets up default parameters for whatever properties you might define on your rendering template. There are 2 magic entries or keys that you can put in here. One is the placeholder, which just tells the system what is the default placeholder for this rendering, and usually that would be something like the page body. The other one is the data source. It just sets up the default data source. Could be something like this. Okay. The template, parameters template, is not anything particularly magic with that one. So let's go and have a look at the files. The first one is of course the MVC view, and I thought we would go through this line by line. The first 4 lines are just standard MVC stuff for including the rendering, the view model for this MVC view. So it's not particularly interesting. This one is actually very interesting because what this one does is it wraps the current rendering in a user control class, which gives you access to all kinds of attributes and stuff that you can use in Speak. If you look at the IntelliSense for this, you'll see there's a bunch of stuff in here. We'll get to that in a bit. Now, one of the attributes is actually just setting up the class name for this one. All of these attributes will get outputted in this line. This is where you get the actual attributes that you want to put on your HTML tag. Well, I think we'll have a look at that in a little bit. So the class is here. Other things is if you want to do include a JavaScript file, you do it using this requires. The first parameter is a category. This is mapped into the web config, which just sort of like it defines a set of folders where the system will search for this file. And what this one actually becomes is something like, let's see, I think it becomes something like Speak v1 client. Not quite sure of this, but it's something like this. This is the output file that'll get out of this line. And the first one is just the custom handler. The next part is actually the category that we have here, which will match an entry in the web config. And this is the file to search for in the folders defined by this category. Another thing you can do with this one is you can actually do the same for CSS files. So you could have client and sample CSS like that. Okay, if you want to map parameters from the parameters template into this one, a very usual pattern is something like this: set attribute. And what we usually do is we use stuff like this. So this could be text, for instance, and then you would get the rendering get string text. So this will pull out the parameters that were set on the rendering and output it into the actual HTML in an attribute that is called data sc text. Now, this particular syntax doesn't support binding. If you want to support binding, you need to supply the corresponding JavaScript attribute as the second parameters. So this is a very common pattern. Let's see what we got else in the IntelliSense. Got a bunch of get functions for getting integers and enumerables and everything. The HTML attributes collects all of the stuff that has been set up on the rendering and output that as a single string. What else do we got? We got a little bit of something like behaviors. We got an access key that we can set up, and these are the data source and some of the other stuff that's just rendering stuff. The control ID is the ID that is set in the rendering parameters, and this gets outputted into an attribute that's called data sc ID. It's not put into the actual ID attribute because that would mess things up. So we output it into the data SC ID. Okay, so what this turns into, let's see if I just remove this line and let's go into the layout, and we'll just drag the sample one in here, and it will get dumped into the page body. Let's just change this a bit so we actually get it in the right one. Here we go. It looks like actually the data source isn't really working right there. There you go. So let's see if we can actually render this. We'll have a look at. Oh, actually, you can see here we get up an error, and I guess that is because we have this sample text here right now. So let's try this again. Forgot a little bit. Yeah, there we go. And let's see if we can find the sample element. Didn't actually get anything now, did we? It's in here, border sample. Oh yeah, there we go. So this is our sample rendering, and as you can see, there's a number of attributes in here. We have the data SC, which is the ID of the control. We have the class, which matches this line. We have some additional stuff that Speak Core is putting into the class to like make sure that this rendering has been registered properly. We have the data require, and you can see here that is the last part of it is the actual file that will get loaded through the custom handler. Okay, so that's the MVC view. It's pretty basic stuff, really. Let's have a look at the JavaScript file. Now there are a few ways to do this in Speak. This is the most complex and most raw way of doing it. On the other hand, it does show off that internally Speak is using a model and a view for each rendering. Let's go through this line by line again. First stuff up here, that is require.js stuff. This just defines that we need to have Sitecore loaded, and once Sitecore has been loaded, we get a callback. Next line is we define our model, and for this particular model we extend the control model, and there's an initialize method in here which you can usually do to set up your model for this rendering. This is the view model, and the way you do this usually is you just use the backbone syntax for this. So here we have the text, and we'll set that to a blank one. That's how you usually do it. Other kinds of stuff you would do here is event handling, so stuff like change text, and this would like toggle this, and then we would have a toggle function down here like that. So this is the model. This model does not have access to the HTML DOM. The view down here does have access to the DOM. First line, again, we just extend the control view, and we get an initialize method as well. In the initialize method has access to the DOM through the EL property, and it also has access to the model, so we could do stuff like that. This would pull out the text property from the model. What you actually often do in the view is actually the other way around, in the initialize method anyway, is that you would actually pull out parameters from the DOM and stick that into the model. So what you often see is you would have stuff like this, and then it would be el.text. It would just take the inner text of this particular element and stick it into the model. Last line is the actual registration of this component. So we have the model and the view, and we have a name. This is just a basic name that we use internally to determine that this is one of the renderings. This is the sample rendering. The last thing is a CSS Selector. This basically means that any HTML component that HTML tag that matches this selector will be instantiated as this particular model and view. And this SC sample, we had that in the HTML. It's this one. Actually, this is the old way of doing it. Currently, we are using a little bit of a different way of doing it. We are actually using the set attributes, and we call this the data SC component, and we'll call this sample. And I didn't do that one right. Sample, like that. And then in the selector instead we would do a div data SC component equals sample. So instead of messing up the classes, you would actually do it as a custom attribute instead. So these are the moving parts, many of the moving parts in a Speak component. We have a rendering item, which is pretty standard, except for the fact there is a couple of additional fields on it. We have a parameters template, which is just a basic template, but you have to set up the base template so that you get the IDs and other attributes from the base controls. You have an MVC view, which you can there's a little wrapper that you can use to output the right HTML. And there is a JavaScript file which has a model and a view, and you have to register that one. Sorry about the jump. The video stopped recording just as I was about to wrap up. Anyway, this concludes this part.